right, so we have additional cells that you find within nervous tissue. They are called neuroglial cells, and this is a whole group of cells. These provide structural support and protection from the neurons, and they also help maintain the environment of the nervous tissue itself. Now, these are kind of special because neuroglial cells are able to divide. They're able to do mitosis. Okay. They also can fill spaces left behind if a neuron dies. So if we have brain damage or something like that, we don't want to just have random empty spaces in our nervous tissue. So these glial cells can fill the spaces. And everyone has its own specialized function. There are 4 neuroglial cells that you find within your central nervous system. They are astrocytes, oligodendrocytes, microglial cells, and ependymal cells. And then we have 2 that are specific to your peripheral nervous system. They are schwann cells and satellite cells. And you know how this is going to go. Let's talk about each one individually. So astrocytes. Okay, these are star-shaped cells. They have many processes, which kind of makes them look like the stars. These processes, they kind of extend into these end feet, which is kind of hard to say. They terminate in end feet. Okay. Here's what they look like. That's easier to. They have these little feet, y'all. Look, and these little feet, they're very grabby. Okay, these little feet are responsible for helping anchor neurons and blood vessels in place. So here's a neuron, and we've kind of grabbed on, and we're kind of holding him down. And this little red thing, this is obviously our blood vessel, and we're holding him in place as well. Okay. These help facilitate transport of nutrients and gases between the blood vessels and the neurons themselves. And they help with assisting in the formation of something called the blood-brain barrier, which is kind of hard to say. It's a lot of B's, blood-brain barrier. Okay. The blood-brain barrier, it will hopefully not shock you to learn that it is a barrier. Okay. We are going to have a protective structure that surrounds the capillaries. Okay, and makes them impenetrable or impermeable to most polar compounds and proteins. Okay, so we do not necessarily want a lot of things getting in and out of our brain capillaries. Now, we do have exceptions. Okay, we do want some things to get in and out of our capillaries. Okay, so for example, oxygen and carbon dioxide, we would want to be able to do gas exchange, but those aren't polar compounds and those aren't proteins. Okay, so we're very selective about what we let into and out of the capillaries in our brains, and that should make a little bit of sense. Think about some of the nasty things that can end up in our blood that eventually make their way to the liver and the kidneys, so we can do some detox. We wouldn't want those to accidentally get put into your brain tissue or anything like that. So we're pretty picky about what can go into and out of the endothelial capillaries here. And then last but not least, your astrocytes also help repair damaged brain tissue by rapid cell division. Keep in mind that neurons themselves are basically amitotic. Okay, so when we are kind of repairing damaged brain tissue, you might be doing a little bit more fibrosis than you would like to compared to regeneration. Okay, but remember, the neuroglials themselves are still mitotically active. Okay, so you could still fill in. So if we had to get rid of this neuron because it was damaged for whatever reason, it's not just going to leave a big hole in the tissue. We can at least fill up that space. Okay. Next, oligodendrocytes, which again is kind of another hard word to say, but it does something kind of important. It produces the myelin sheath that you find around nerves within the central nervous system. Okay, now that doesn't mean a whole lot to us quite yet because we haven't talked about what the myelin sheath does. And we're actually not really going to talk a lot about what the myelin sheath does right this second. Okay, we are going to definitely talk about it. Okay, but right now we're really just saying that oligodendrocytes, they make myelin, specifically in the central nervous system. Okay, and I keep saying central nervous system for a reason. Okay, you are not going to find oligodendrocytes in your peripheral nervous system. Don't get mad, but you have cells in your peripheral nervous system that make myelin. They're just called something else. Okay, so oligodendrocytes make the myelin sheath, okay, in your central nervous system. Okay, we're just going to leave it there for right this second. Okay. Microglial cells. These are activated when you have injured your nervous tissue. They become phagocytes. Okay. They ingest a couple of things: disease-causing microorganisms, dead neurons, cell debris, things like that. Okay. You can kind of see the picture's a little bit small, but the microglial cell is this like pinkish cell, and this tiny little purplish dot is being ingested by the microglial cell. Admittedly, this is very tiny, a little hard to see, but he's eating something, I promise. Okay, so these are phagocytes. And then we have ependymal cells. Okay, these ependymal cells, they are ciliated. Okay, so you know that cilia kind of beat back and forth and they create waves and things like that. These cells line some hollow spaces within the central nervous system. Okay. Now, the hollow space is not exactly an empty space, because this space is going to be full of fluid, specifically cerebrospinal fluid. You're going to hear it termed CSF a lot, your cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. So these ependymal cells, they both manufacture and circulate the cerebrospinal fluid. Okay, so you can see our little cell here. We've got the fluid being secreted. Boop. The cilia are helping to circulate it, to help move it around, things like that. Okay, but that's where it comes from, your ependymal cells. Now, those are the 4 of your central nervous system. Okay, so here's our recap. Our astrocytes have the little end feet. They hold everybody in place. They make the blood-brain barrier, etc. Your oligodendrocytes make myelin, okay, in the central nervous system. That's what all the blue stuff is. Okay. Your microglial cells are phagocytes, so they eat things. And then your ependymal cells make and circulate cerebrospinal fluid. Okay. Now, remember, we had 2 in the peripheral nervous system. They are schwann cells and satellite cells. Okay. Now, you remember how I told you that you were going to make myelin in the peripheral nervous system? We just weren't going to call the cells oligodendrocytes. Here we are. We call them schwann cells instead. Okay? Don't ask me why. We have different names for cells that do the same thing. I'm not in charge, y'all. Okay? I'm not in charge. But schwann cells produce myelin within the peripheral nervous system. Okay? And last but not least, we have satellite cells, okay, which are these kind of blobby looking cells. Now, these are kind of my favorite because, so first of all, this is where they're located. You find them on kind of surrounding the cell bodies themselves, okay. And here's why they're my favorite. We still don't really know what they do. Okay, we think they kind of provide a supportive function to the cell body, but we don't exactly know how they work quite yet. We're working on it. Okay, but they're kind of my favorite just because they're kind of mysterious still.